Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. We are very, very happy to welcome you to our webinar on rethinking CEO succession from replacement to reinvention. Let me shortly introduce myself. My name is Annette Aris. I'm a senior affiliate professor of strategy at INSEAD and also the academic director of INSEAD's Corporate Governance Center. In the other half of my life, I've been a board member of many companies myself over the past 20 years. One of them, ASML, where I was the vice chair for the past 10 years. And I'm very, very happy and honored to moderate the webinar today. So let's go to the next slide so I can introduce the agenda. Yes, so the agenda today, the webinar is here to launch the new book by Professor Stanislav Shekshnia, 21 Questions about CEO Successions. And so we will start with an introduction by Stanislav on the key highlights of his book. And after that, we're very honored to have two really experienced chairs sharing their experience with us. I will introduce them later. And then finally, we will have time for Q&A. So we're very much looking forward to the webinar, but before we do that, a few practical remarks. Can I have the next slide? So as you will notice, the audience is muted. Please keep your video off. We will have no chat, but when you have questions, please use the Q&A tab to suggest questions. If you can't find it at the bottom of your screen, go to the More section, and there you will see the Q&A tab. And you can tap on it and put in your question. The webinar will be recorded, and we will share the recording with you afterwards. If you have any technical issues, please email corporategovernance@insead.edu. Next slide, please. So I'm very honored to introduce our three speakers today. First, Professor Stanislav Shekshnia. He's a senior affiliate professor of entrepreneurship and family enterprise. And he's also the long-standing co-chair of our program, Leading from the Chair. He wrote 11 books on all kinds of governance topics, for example, leading a board, the CEO School, and most recently, the 21 Questions. Besides being a professor, Stanislav is also a very experienced board member. At the moment, for example, he is at the board of Techno Energy. Then we have our two chairs. And first, I would like to introduce you to Sanna Suvanto-Harsai. Sanna has been on over 25 boards in Northern Europe. Public boards, private equity boards, family boards, state-owned boards. She's currently on the board of Finnair, of Bow Concept, which is a design, furniture and interior design company. Posti, which is the postal company of Finland, which just IPO'd. Corfax, which is housewares and practical and durable household products. And she's been named the most influential businesswoman in Finland 7 times. The other person I very much would like to introduce to you is Gilbert Costin. Gilbert is currently the chair of Sandoz, the global leader in off-patent medicines, and of SGS, which is the world's leading testing, inspection, and certification company. He's also on the board of Danone and of Four Seasons Hotels and Resorts. So we are very, very honored, Sanna and Gilbert, that you joined the webinar, and we're very much looking forward to your reflections and discussions. But for now, let me hand over to Stanislav. Please take the floor, Stanislav, and can I have the next slide just to show the book? And just give us the highlights of your book and the main findings you found when you were writing the book. Stanislav, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Annette. Hello, everybody. I'm very pleased to be with you here and to present my book. Let me try to share my slides. Can I do it? I think yes, right, it works.
Yeah, it's coming up.
Okay, so the book's title is
Stanislav,
yes.
it still needs to, yeah, now it's full screen. Yeah.
Okay. The book's title is 21 Questions about CEO Succession, and I would like to start this little introduction to the book by asking everybody a question. Who is your next CEO? If you had some uncomfortable feelings when you heard this question, this book is probably for you, and hopefully it will help you to be more comfortable next time when you hear this question. So let me start by explaining why I wrote this book. There are sort of two reasons. The one is very personal. I've been working in the area of CEO succession for the last 25 years, and I've been exposed to more than 60 successions as a board member, as a chair of the succession committee, as an advisor, and as a CEO myself many years ago. I run the CEO succession class at INSEAD, which I very much enjoy. And there I get a lot of questions about CEO succession. Actually, most of the questions that this book is discussing are the questions that came from the CEO succession class at INSEAD. And personally, I'm not always happy how that works when it comes down to the CEO succession. It seems like I know all the questions and all the answers, and yet it doesn't always work. So I wanted to put it on paper and help myself and hopefully some other people. So there's some good personal reasons, but of course there are objective reasons why I decided to write a book about CEO succession. If I put it very shortly, the reason is that we have more successions that we used to have 10 years ago, 20 years ago, and especially 30 years ago. CEOs tenures are decreasing, so we have to change CEOs more often. And unfortunately, it's still not very effective. The numbers are quite frustrating if we look at them. Depending on the research, and there's a lot of research about CEO succession, which I refer to in my book, from 30 to 40% of board decisions about the next CEO are not good decisions. The boards choose the wrong person to lead the company, which leads to 20 to 30% of new CEOs departing within the first 18 months of their tenure. It means it's outright failure. If we look at overall CEO population, we see that about 80% of them leave with some kind of, at least a little bit of push from external stakeholders. So the picture is not that great. However, there is a hope. If we look at CEOs who serve for more than 10 years, we see that it is possible. More than 20% of CEOs stay there for 10 years, which means long tenure, it is possible. There are some boards that make good decisions about CEO succession. And what is also interesting and important, this is not industry specific. It's not like people in manufacturing or in automotive stay more than 10 years, and people in IT industry, they change every three years. It is not industry specific. In any industry, you can have a long-serving CEO. And of course, almost all long-serving CEOs are high-performing CEOs. Why is it so difficult to choose the right CEO? The answer could be long answer, it could be short answer. The short answer is that there are two main reasons why choosing the next CEO is so difficult. The first one is that when we decide who will manage the company in the future, we try to predict the future. And predicting the future has always been a very tricky business. And human beings are not always good. And very often they're not very good at predicting the future. AI is there, but AI doesn't really help us with the future. AI help us with the past. AI help us with the present, but it doesn't really help us to predict the future. We still have rely on our judgment. And the second reason, probably even more important, is that it's a very sensitive issue. The emotional stakes are very high, and when emotions are high, people do not always act rationally. Mm, uh, it is about board members not always acting rationally. It is about the incumbent CEO not always acting rationally, and it's also about candidates not always acting rationally, and it's about other stakeholders. If I give a little bit more sophisticated answer, which I think is more helpful, if we want to get it right, the major problem of CEO succession is that the process itself puts the key actors into ambivalent position. And let me show you some of those ambivalences that create paradoxes of the CEO succession. We all know that the board owns CEO succession. However, it has to replace the CEO, and for that, it needs the help of the CEO it has to replace. So it's very ambivalent, right? The board needs to replace the CEO and need to work towards finding a new one. Yet the board also needs the CEO who is highly engaged and highly performing. How do you do this? How do you make sure that your CEO is highly performing when you say, okay, well, in a few years, you need to leave, and we are working with you on making sure that you will live in this 2 years. So the CEO needs to deliver performance, but at the same time, the CEO need to prepare their replacement. The CEO works towards the future of the company, yet the CEO knows that they will need to leave this company at some point. And the same is true about the successor. The successor comes in to ensure continuity, yet they also need to make their mark. They need to demonstrate to important stakeholders that they are effective leaders. That all makes it very ambivalent and difficult to manage. How does the book can help to deal with this ambivalence? I think in three ways. The questions themselves. The books describes the CEO fundamentals, and the books talks about what I call the critical success factors, things that go on top of the fundamentals. Let me very briefly go through these three elements. So the questions, why questions and why 21 questions? Well, 21, my favorite number is 13. So I wanted to write the book based on the 13 questions, but unfortunately, I could not synthesize all questions that I get from people with whom I work on CEO succession in 13 questions. Then I asked myself, so what is the next favorite number? And I said to myself, well, it's 21 because 21 is a lucky number. So excuse me, I try to synthesize the questions that I get during my CEO class and during my work as an advisor to this 21 questions. I think more important, the question is why questions? Why not 21 answers about CEO succession? I really like this quote from Claude Lévi-Strauss, and I often use it, that says that wise man doesn't give the right answers, he poses the right questions. And I believe that it is very important to start with the questions rather than with the answers, because questions lead to reflections while answers lead to action. And it's too early to act when you have not reflect. I think this is one of the core principles of our governance programs at INSEAD. We try to convey this principle to our participants that board members, they start by questions and they start by reflecting rather than jumping to the actions. Why it's important? Because reflection allows us to design a good process, and CEO succession requires a good process, the process which is unique for every organization and that reflects its specifics. And the second reason why I think it's important and it's more effective to start with questions is that the questions are the same for every company. However, the answers will be different. The CEO succession is very contextual, and it requires different approach depending on what type of company you are. When you are a startup or when you are a very mature, complex organization, you need to have different approach. You need to have somewhat different processes. However, the questions are the same. So that's why I hope that the questions will help boards to be more effective in the CEO succession. The second thing that board describes is the fundamentals of CEO succession. We talk about the CEO succession as a process, as an ongoing process, not something that we have because we have a specific CEO and we need to replace the specific CEO. It's a good governance process that exists independently of a specific CEO. The process has its own stages. I think I will not spend time on talking about fundamentals with this audience because I think you know fundamentals. Maybe the only thing on the process I would like to bring your attention to is that very often boards forget about the last stage of the CEO succession process, which is transition and integration. They start celebrating when they appoint the new CEO, when they say, okay, we've selected the new leader, and then they relax. And of course, that is not a very effective approach. I remember a few years ago, I ran into a group of people who I knew drinking champagne in the bar of a London hotel, and I asked them, "What are you celebrating, guys?" And they said, "Well, we just decided who our CEO, who our next CEO is going to be. So we're having this little celebration." And I joked, and I think it was an unfortunate joke. I said, "It's probably too early to celebrate. You should celebrate it in 6 months when the CEO is really integrated into the new position and is accepted as a legitimate leader in the organization by all stakeholders." And we all laughed, and I went off, and they continued drinking champagne. But unfortunately, the leader left after 3 months being on the job. So it was indeed a little bit too early to celebrate. So the CEO selection process is important. I also talk about some fundamentals which are important for the CEO succession. That you need to have clear governance. You have to be very clear about the next CEO profile. Yet you have to review it on a continuous basis because things change in the environment. You need to have a very strong pipeline internally, yet benchmark externally. You absolutely have to engage the incumbent CEO. You cannot really do succession without the incumbent CEO. Whenever the board is not able to collaborate with the CEO, the board ends up hiring external CEO, and we all know that external candidates usually are not as effective as internal ones unless your company is in deep trouble. You have to assess candidates using multiple methods, not relying only on interviews, because we all know that interviews are not so effective. However, we very often rely mostly on interviews. And whenever you have a new CEO, you have to design the framework for the new CEO from scratch. So I think the audience really knows this. What I would like to spend the next maybe 5 minutes on is really talking about the nuances. What, in my view, makes the difference, and book explores this in more detail. So if you're interested, you can see it in the book. As I said earlier, the CEO succession puts actors in ambivalent positions, and I think when we recognize that it's an ambivalent process, it helps us to manage it more effective. What does ambivalence mean? Ambivalence means that we have to move from one position into another during the process of the CEO succession. We need to do what Robert Merton, who was one of the first scholars really worked with ambivalence, called oscillating behavior. Sometimes you need to be very engaged as the board, and sometimes you need to let the CEO to take the leading role. And this is very important. And I think if we fail to recognize this, then we will never be able to have this effective partnership with the CEO. And without the effective partnership with the incumbent CEO, we will never be able to have a good succession. Let me give you a couple of examples. If we go back to the CEO succession process, and if we go to the first stage, the setup with deciding how we will run the CEO succession process, the next cycle of the CEO succession process, who will do what are the key milestones in this process. This is clearly the board work. The board has to be in charge and design and make key decisions. But when we move on to the next stage, pipeline development, the board should delegate most of the work to the incumbent CEO and people who support them. HR people and leadership development people, because they are on the ground. They know leaders, they know people with potential, and only then can help these people to develop. When we move to selection and the definition of mandate of the next CEO, again, the board is in the driver's seat. The CEO should not be part of those decisions because it's a board responsibility and accountability to choose the next CEO. But when we move on to the last stage, the transition and integration, again, the CEO, the outgoing CEO, and actually the incoming CEO are important parts of the process, and board should leave enough room for them to act. So this agility and ambivalence, I think, is the first important factor that distinguishes effective CEO successions from less effective ones. What are the other few things that I believe are important? One is, how do you really manage the CEO succession? In my experience, when the whole board tries to do it, it doesn't really work. You need to have a person or a committee who are dedicated to the task. People who have time, people who have experience, and people who also have stamina to stand up to the incumbent CEO and to other important stakeholders. Of course, the board retains the key decision powers. However, the real practical work has to be done by a committee or a specific director. The second thing, which I believe is very important, to make sure that the CEO succession is impersonal. It's not about replacing a specific CEO. It's about ensuring sustainability of the organization. I always like to say to my CEOs when I start conversation about their succession planning that it's not about you. We had CEO succession process as part of our governance 10 years before you became the CEO, and we will have it 10 years after you leave the company. It makes it easier for the CEO to collaborate with the board if it's not very personal. Very important to follow the process. Research tells us that boards that have a formal CEO succession process get better results. However, very often we follow the process till the very end, but at the end we forget about the process. We move on the side all the good things we've done through the process, and we operate by our gut feeling. That's not right. You have to trust the process and to follow it till the very end. Very important is the transition. Without effective transition, the CEO succession is not complete. You can choose the right person, the brightest person on earth, but if you don't ensure effective transition, this person will not be successful. So the board should not relax until the new CEO is fully immersed into the job. Very important for the board to make sure that outgoing CEO has a new project in life. And we should not leave it to the CEO only. We should inquire, we should ask about the next process, and we should help the CEO to do this. Because when the CEO does not have a next process, the CEO is usually very frustrated, trying to hang around in different capacities as a board member, as an advisor, which is not very helpful for the incoming CEO, and it's also not very good for their health. So we have to be helpful, and we have to show care for the outgoing CEO. And the last but not least, unplanned succession most likely will happen to most boards. And we should admit that it will happen. We should be mentally prepared for that, because unfortunately, many boards are not. Somehow they believe, okay, we have a good CEO succession process, we will follow it, and in 5 years, we will have a planned changeover. It does not necessarily will happen this way. Very often, the boards need to replace the CEO, and they have to be mentally prepared for that. And when it happens, instead of rushing in making some irrational decisions, boards should run a little short process, which is very similar to the one that I describe in this book. And let me finish with the quote from my own book, because that's what I really had in mind when I was writing this book. I hope that this book will make hard conversations easier to start and easier to conduct. And I also hope that it will make difficult decisions harder to avoid, because boards need to be on top of CEO successions, and they need to own it, and they really need to make decisions about the process and about the CEO. Thank you, and I will stop my presentation here.